Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started.
Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. I am going to be talking about stimulating nervines today. So these are nervines, which are herbs with an affinity for the nervous system, but these ones have a more sort of gentle stimulant action. And I'm going to go into what that means in all the depth in a minute. Just a shameless plug, the Herbalism PTSD and Traumatic Stress course is open for enrollment at the moment. If you haven't looked at the course page, have a look. It's got all the info about it there, all the amazing modules, how it's structured, what different people have said about it. It's a massive offering that is only available now until Sunday. And then I'm not going to make it available to join until sort of late September, October, later on in the year. I need to figure out when, because I want to launch this like Frontline Herbalism membership thing. So anyway, so much going on, but I just want to say, please don't miss out. If you're curious, please check out the course page. No one is turned away for lack of funds. Like, you can join it for nothing if needed. You can join it and pop in a £5 donation a month. You could join it for the standard price if you've got the funds, and that's fucking game changing for the Solidarity Apothecary and the things that it enables me and others who support the project to do. So anyway, please check it out. All right, let's fucking dive into the stimulating nervines. All right, so let's dive in. So stimulating herbs. So these are herbs with an affinity for the nervous system with a gentle stimulant action. And as ever, I'm going to give a few disclaimers and some nuances around this stuff. So there is a big difference between a sort of stimulant nervine and a hardcore stimulant, or not even a hardcore stimulant, but like, I guess, are kind of cultural stimulants. I'm not going to diss coffee because I fucking love coffee, and coffee is absolutely rammed to the rafters with antioxidants. But it's all the stuff that often comes with like the sugary crap and the cream and all this shit. So, and like, everyone is constitutionally different and more sensitive to stimulants, and maybe not aware of the effects of stimulation on things like anxiety, and often, including myself, have like a bit of addictive relationship to certain stimulants, especially things like coffee or black tea, for example. But there is obviously a difference between having a cup of rosemary tea and having like a fucking energy drink that is like loaded with like often like loads of like hardcore herbs. Like, people don't realize like how herbal these drinks are, but also often containing a lot of sugar and other kind of chemicals which aren't always great for the body, especially for the cardiovascular system. But I do think there is a time and place for stimulating drinks. And as someone who is 2 years postpartum now, who, my little one is fucking amazing on the sleep front, but will still have like wakings, especially when teething. So this week's been really, really hard. Of course I need a fucking coffee in the morning. So I'm not dissing the stimulants, but I guess I just wanted to like preface that I'm talking about a different sort of stimulation. And I guess that links to just this like bigger pattern within capitalism where we're kind of culturally in this intense kind of like hyper arousal exhaustion cycle. So people are exhausted because they have to work shit fucking jobs and travel far for them and not get enough sleep, and they can't afford high quality food, and they don't get enough rest, and all of these other structural factors. But basically, people are becoming very dependent on stimulants for like a false energy. And when I work with clients, it's all about how can we like increase our energy like naturally in kind of like different ways. Starter for 10, getting more fucking sleep. So working with sleep herbs, working with nutrition and daytime nervous system support so that we have like deeper quality sleep, looking at our nutrition, looking at our kind of like mitochondrial health, like in the cells, that really affect like energy in our bodies, and, you know, just kind of like reducing this like fight or flight activation, etc., etc. So there are different ways to build our energy in our bodies. And I think one of the most rebellious things we can do is kind of push back against this hyperarousal, like exhaustion cycle where, you know, we just don't have any energy. So then we're dependent on stimulants. And then that leads to more depletion because a lot of these stimulants are putting a lot of pressure on our systems, on our kind of adrenal glands, on this kind of stress response in the body. So yeah, that's what I think we need to kind of like really challenge. But in a kind of trauma context, obviously a lot of people, like, depending on where they are in this kind of cortisol picture, and, you know, chronic stress and trauma is way more than one fucking stress hormone. Like, that stress hormone is connected to all sorts of things, but like often there is this kind of like adrenaline, like high cortisol state where, you know, we're just like body is like flooded in this like fight flight response. And then that commonly leads to quite an extreme state of exhaustion. And sometimes that exhaustion is like a real like shutdown state, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And other times it's a more kind of like frozen fatigue state where there is not a lot of like physical energy. You know, someone might have chronic fatigue or really struggle with like kind of physical activity and would give the appearance of needing stimulation, but actually their nervous system is on like absolute fucking overdrive, and that is what's actually a major driver of their exhaustion. So people who have grown up in states of really intense chronic stress and trauma often then hit this kind of like physical plateau where they develop, you know, autoimmune challenges or like chronic fatigue or ME, things like this. But their nervous systems are still not in a kind of state of like parasympathetic rest or digest. Like, it's more like they're still, yeah, highly activated, highly triggered, but it's just kind of like masked by exhaustion. So yeah, again, so stimulants might not be appropriate for someone. So, you know, like people talk about herbs like ashwagandha or rhodiola or the different ginsengs. And these herbs traditionally have really been indicated for people in very debilitating states of chronic illness and fatigue. I don't feel like that picture always matches this kind of like capitalism version of it, in the sense of like that fatigue coming from really fucking overwhelmed like stress response over decades. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, why is everything so fucking complicated with herbal medicine, eh? But yeah, if someone is experiencing fatigue but has, for example, a fast heart rate, or, you know, a lot of like anxiety, a lot of like intense kind of like like, I don't want to say like emotionality, but like a kind of like exaggerated startle response, for example, then we know that their system is still actually in a state of like hyperarousal, and therefore stimulants might not be ideal. And that's quite different to a sort of shutdown state. And I don't know if you've listened to the series that I did called Soothing Survival, where I talked about different nervous system states in like much more detail. I've also got like a kind of email series about it if you're like more into the old written word. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that episode about the shutdown state, because I talk about it in much more detail. But the shutdown state is actually when we're not in fight or flight, but we're actually still having like a full-on trauma response, but it's our parasympathetic, our rest and digest state that's actually activated, but it's kind of like almost too activated and gets stuck, in the sense of like kind of like playing dead. Like, that's what we would see in the animal kingdom, for example. So when someone is in this state where they're kind of like dominant state is a parasympathetic one, but not a kind of like nourishing, joyful, rest and play kind of state, but a kind of like, like shut down state. People might feel like very fucking empty or helpless. There's like a numbness. So there isn't that activation there. It's just kind of hollow, and people will feel kind of like drained. And when someone is in that state, the world still feels very overwhelming, as it would if you were like very activated, but actually it shifts to more of a like everything is pointless and uninteresting, which I think is like very different. It's kind of like the difference between a stuck tension and a limpness. So in these states there's more of a kind of like heaviness and like a dissociation and a kind of brain fog, and like a mental heaviness, and like, you know, like a desire to be like a hermit. So for example, just, I don't want to like bring up Taylor's death all the time, like my friend who killed himself in prison, but like after several months of really extreme levels of activation, like really intense levels of fight or flight, of like pure fucking rage, I then hit this like shutdown state, which is much more intimidating, I think, in terms of like, didn't want to fucking get out of bed, didn't want to shower, didn't want to fucking eat, couldn't even be bothered to cry, like nothing even got me angry anymore, you know. It was just like a kind of hollowness. And it's a very challenging state. And I think, you know, like my mum, bless her, had quite intense mental health issues when I was little, which actually I just think were due to fucking patriarchy and capitalism, of like trying to bring up her children on fucking nothing with like no support. But like I remember her having a nervous breakdown when I was 11, and she just would lie in her bed, like lie in her bedroom in the dark, wouldn't get up when we needed to go to school, like things like this. And it's like, now I've got that like kind of trauma training, I can see like she was really in this like shutdown state, whereas just, you know, you feel like completely helpless. And I guess that's like an extreme example, but there are kind of like more like minor examples of that, where it might be just like a passing moment in the day where you feel really hopeless and fatigued and you don't want to fucking get out of bed, for example, after, you know, you've had like a super stressful weekend or something. And, you know, like with all of these states, this is what I talk about in Soothing Survival, like all of these states are like evolutionary adaptations to like protect us and to conserve our energy. So if someone has gone through like months or years of like relentless stress, then this is actually the nervous system protecting itself from more stress and more danger. Does that make sense? By not wanting to interact with the world. And so when we're in that kind of state, like there are a couple of things that can shift it. Sometimes an extreme fight or flight situation can lift someone out of this. So that's what happened with me with Taylor, was like, you know, just, I can't remember what happened. I think it was something to do with another friend in prison, but it just suddenly forced me into fight or flight. And then I kind of like was back in this kind of like activated movement like zone. But generally this state, you can't force it. Like like the answer is like gentleness. So like, it's about like gentle activity to help like kind of unfreeze, if that makes sense. So, you know, maybe like it's a case of like, right, I'm just gonna have a shower, and that's like my one goal for the day, and I don't have the energy for it, but like I'm just gonna try that. And it's that just like gentle movement that then makes you feel like you could do something else possibly. But yeah, so I feel like I'm just going on side rants again, but basically what we're seeing is a like depression of kind of function, right? Like a brain fog. Wow, imagine. Anyway, a brain fog, dissociation, low blood pressure, you know, often a lower heart rate, decreased metabolism, and just this like loss of hope. And bringing a kind of gentle stimulation in can, I guess just kind of like activate someone to kind of shift from that in a kind of like gentle, loving nudge way. So the stimulating nervines that I talk about in the PTSD course that I profile like in depth are rosemary, hyssop, sage, and thyme. And you might be noticing, if you're into herbalism, that they're quite similar in terms of like herbal actions. So they're all sort of like circulatory stimulants, so they do help like move blood flow in general, but they really have like an affinity with the head, so they move blood to the brain, and that makes them often like traditionally indicated for things like headaches and migraines, and also like aiding concentration and memory. But yeah, I think this kind of like circulation to the head thing is quite critical. They also have like neuroprotective antioxidants, so you know they've got the plant chemicals in them that are kind of like supporting our system that's like under functioning and is quite struggling. And I think a lot of the time when people are in a like more shut down state, there's often like a kind of low grade like immune activation response that's like happening, if that makes sense. And I think this is my, again, I'm always throwing out my like sneaky hypotheses, but like I think there's something going on there with these herbs and the kind of like, yeah, the antioxidants they contain, and that having this kind of like anti-inflammatory response in someone, and then that inflammation decreasing to just lift someone's energy a little bit. Because, you know, like when someone's got chronic illness, if you can just like help decrease inflammation by 5%, they've got a 5% energy gain. And that can be the difference between I've got the energy to go wash my face or I don't. Does that make sense? So this is my theory in terms of these herbs and their sort of like affinities with this state. They're often like, it's not a contradiction, but they're often like antispasmodics as well, you know, especially for the respiratory system. So they also like relax tension. And even though like shutdown itself is quite a limp state, when someone's more in a kind of like freeze, like they're anxious and overwhelmed, so they just become kind of frozen and stuck, these antispasmodic herbs can like help shift that tension in my experience. But another theory I'm throwing out there, all of these herbs have kind of like strong antimicrobial actions. And fucking hell, like, I just really think, like, what are we? Like, maybe all our nervous system responses are just a response to our gut flora. Do you know what I mean? So maybe it's their antimicrobial action that is actually affecting our nervous system. Like, who fucking knows? This is where research is going. But yeah, I think this kind of like impact on the microbiome could be like a big factor. And they're also like warming and kind of drying. And I think when people are like in a kind of shutdown state, like energetically, that is often quite cold and often quite damp and stagnant. Especially like with a lot of like chronic fatigue, like in the sense of like someone with ME that has like a strong inflammatory picture where there's like a lot of like lymphatic congestion, for example, like sore throat, like swollen lymph nodes in the groin. There's often this like damp stagnation tissue state that is often really contributing to the fatigue. So working with stimulating nervines, which have this kind of like warming, moving, drying action, I think is really helpful. But yeah, so they kind of like, you know, help us just give that like little kick up the butt. Does that make sense? In terms of their like warming, stimulating effects. Does that make sense? I'm going to talk about a couple of them in a little bit more detail now. All right, so I'm going to super briefly chat about Rosemary. Fortunately, the baby is on his way home. Well, not unfortunately. I can't fucking wait to see him. It's been at nursery all morning, but my mum's picking him up. So, okay, so let's dive in. So yeah, similar to what I've described, Rosemary has a bunch of amazing herbal actions. So this kind of like circulatory stimulant action, moving blood to the brain, and yeah, like traditionally, like there's been this kind of like energetic connection with grief. So like rosemary for remembrance. And again, I have all sorts of theories around that, but I think rosemary, yeah, for me, like it's just too strong. Like I can have rosemary in like cooking, for example, but it's so warming and drying, and I'm such a warm constitution person that I just can't really work with like a tincture, for example, because also like rosemary is like very strong, like antimicrobial. So for me and my body, I wouldn't be taking like a rosemary tincture long term at all. Like maybe if I had a certain cold, I might have like rosemary tea if that's all I could find. But for other people, they can fucking have rosemary tea every day, and it's part of like anchoring into their routine, and they love it, and it's not stimulating at all, and it's actually very calming. And I think it's worth highlighting that these stimulating nervines, like, they're not like stimulants, if you know, they're not like having a fucking massive cup of fucking coffee. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a much more subtle, like gentle action. And rosemary also has this like affinity with the liver that can help aid digestion. And when someone is in like a shutdown state, they often have, like I mentioned, this like depression of function. And often things just aren't, you know, the cylinders aren't firing, right? Like they might not be producing the digestive enzymes they need to help process food, or they might have low stomach acid, for example. So like, you know, or maybe there's a lot of like gut dysbiosis going on that is causing a lot of fatigue. So rosemary is like really fantastic in those kind of, you know, in that affinity with the gut, and in that affinity, especially with kind of like gut infections and also like liver related things. And it's quite kind of like astringent, which is quite kind of toning, which again is probably why I don't get on with it very well, because I'm a very tight tone dense person. But yeah, for someone when there is that kind of like laxity, you know, like looser stools or like diarrhea, then they've, you know, rosemary's full of these amazing like astringent tannins that can really, really help. And, you know, we often work with rosemary with like respiratory infections because of its amazing like decongestant effect on the chest and like amazing kind of antispasmodic action. And again, all these fucking amazing volatile oils and antimicrobial things going on. So there's lots of ways to work with rosemary. It's generally suggested to not work with rosemary when you're preggers. But yeah, there is like a kind of long aromatherapy use with rosemary. But yeah, I think the tea is like fucking wonderful. And I think like tea tasting with rosemary is really nice if you're doing sort of like spiritual, emotional, energetic work, especially around grief. Or the fucking vinegar. Like, I hate vinegar, right? Like, I really don't like vinegar, but a nice rosemary vinegar for someone to add to their food who doesn't have a yeast intolerance, fucking ideal. And also the infused oil, oh my God, dreamy in things like chest rubs. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking because there's so much about rosemary in the PTSD course. I think I've mentioned, but like in each plant profile, I do dive into some kind of research that I found in terms of like clinical trials and things. So in the rosemary section, there are some like interesting studies where rosemary has been supportive for people who are actually coming off methadone, which is interesting, and also people experiencing depression or like memory issues or challenges or different mood states. So yeah, when you join the course, I put in all the original papers in a like resource drive, like folders, but I also like quote the research in the plant profile. So yeah, shameless plug, please join the course if you're interested in that geekery. Right, I'm gonna record one more and then I think my little one is gonna arrive. Okay, so thyme. I mean, who doesn't know thyme? What a fucking dreamy herb. Really accessible. You can grow it in your garden. You can grow it on your balcony. Loads of like cultural relationships with this plant, especially in terms of, you know, like culinary herbalism and, you know, integrating thyme with your food. So I fucking love a thyme glycerite. Oh, it's so good. I don't like making it because the volatile oils are really fucking strong. You need to have the windows open for that shit, man. But having a thyme glycerite in the immune tonic that I make with the Solidarity Apothecary and the one we make for Calais, it's like, it's so fucking great. Like, there's not many other herbs that I would want to reach to quite as quickly for an upper respiratory infection than thyme. Has an incredible relaxant action on the sort of bronchial tubes and is helpful for people with asthma. Again, probably because of like the fucking microbiome angle. But yeah, it's very warming and drying. So it's really fantastic where there is this kind of like dampness and wetness. And like I've mentioned before, like in a kind of shutdown depressed kind of state, there is often this dampness and wetness. And like rosemary, it has a real like affinity with the liver. Also a lot of like astringent kind of tannins, also just amazing antimicrobial against gut infections. What if all depression is just a response to fucking cheeky gut bacteria taking over? Do you know what I mean? Or a response to fucking hardness of life and trauma, but you know what I mean. So I feel like thyme is kind of like having its effect through lots of different mechanisms. Okay, and yeah, like there's all this stuff around UTIs and thrush, again, microbiome stuff. And, you know, you can also add thyme infused oils or the essential oil to things like bruise ointments, for example. It's really fantastic for pain relief. So yeah, there's so many things you can do with thyme, but obviously careful with like infants. I mean, fucking be careful with essential oils. Anyway, I'm not French. No, I'm just joking. There's just like such different. Whenever I used to work with this French doctor in Calais, like they're so free and easy with essential oils. Like the British, like UK herbalists are all just like having panic attacks about the amount of essential oils people are recommending. But anyway, I think thyme has just this like amazing affinity with people that are, just like struggling. Like, and I think like a lot of people that have this kind of like shutdown, chronic fatigue, ME picture with a lot of inflammation, like everyone manifests that in different ways. Like maybe that's like musculoskeletal challenges, but like a lot of people have it like with this like respiratory fault line, like they have shortness of breath, they have chronic chest infections, they have, you know, like shortness of breath challenges just through like day-to-day movement. Maybe they've got like a history of asthma, and again, history of asthma, microbiome, thyme, it's all connected. But yeah, like I think that thyme is just like a wonderful kind of gentle stimulating nervine. And like the thing is with plants, right, they get like lumped into their categories, like, oh, this is a respiratory herb, this is an immune herb, this is for migraines. But like when we think like comprehensively with that whole energetic picture, we can see that there is like always a lot going on. And if someone is in this kind of like depressed, damp state, then working with thyme as a nervine can be like really powerful, because it can provide that kind of like gentle stimulation, you know, in the sense of like if someone's got really immense brain fog, that is so fucking exhausting for them to just function like daily tasks. Like maybe you just have a cup of thyme tea to help you concentrate on doing your PIP application or doing some life admin or doing some organizing. Do you know what I mean? Like I think we can sort of like skillfully pick and choose the herbs that we work with and when we work with them. So anyway, but the little one is coming down the drive, so I'm going to stop talking. Thank you for listening. The fucking Herbalism, PTSD and Traumatic Stress course is open until Sunday. Don't know why I'm so hyper. Oh, it's because I had a big coffee in a posh coffee shop this morning, hence the stimulation. But yeah, I just want to say, please fucking join the course. It will break my heart if you email me when I've shut the whole thing down and you're like, I missed it. So please sign up. Like, sorry about that beeping. I'm trying to make lunch for the little one at the same time. No one is turned away for lack of funds. Obviously, all the fucking donations are amazing and are life-changing and support all the shit I do with the Solidarity Apothecary. But yeah, you are welcome to access it if you need it. And I strongly encourage people to bounce around. I mean, like, obviously, I think it's important to go through like the herbal safety stuff. But if you have listened to this podcast and you're like, oh, I really want to learn about these nervines more, then you can just like, you know, watch those lessons, for example. Like, it's lifetime access. So you have enough time to bounce about and go where you need to go and where your needs are. So yeah, I hope this has been interesting and helpful. I will be back soon. Okay, take care.
Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.